Welcome to the Jeff Knows Inc. Entrepreneurial Podcast with your host, Jeff Lopes. Jeff has over 2 decades experience as a serial entrepreneur, building brands like Kimura from his home basement to a multi-million-dollar global brand that has sold over 250,000 pairs of boxing gloves. Jeff's here to educate, guide, and drive you on the process of bringing your ideas and dreams to reality with the inspiring stories from some of the top business minds.
Welcome to episode number 85 of the Jeff Knows Inc. podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Lopes. Super excited to have on today Justin Schenck. Justin is the host of one of the most popular podcasts around Growth Now movement. Also, the founder of Growth Now Summit. Incredible conversation. We dive into wrestling, we dive into life, we dive into family. Sit back, everyone, and enjoy. We are live on the Jeff Knows Inc. podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Lopes. Super excited. I got a big smiley face across the screen here. Justin Schenck, how are you, brother? I appreciate you being here. Me and Justin hooked up a couple weeks ago. We got a lot of mutual friends, and we have a lot of things in common. So it's going to be a great conversation today. I'm super excited to have him here. Justin is also the host of a great podcast, Growth Now Movement. He's got a ton of things happening. So I always start off by letting our audience know what you're currently doing and what you're up to, and then we're just let the conversation go and just wherever it takes us today. So what are you up to, Tim?
Yeah, man. Obviously, look, the podcast is kind of the centralized thing of everything that I'm doing. And it kind of spins out into multiple things, right? So I do some growth coaching. I do podcast production and coaching for a number of clients. I speak all over the country pre-COVID on podcasting, overcoming adversity, sharing my story, and hopefully inspiring 1 or 2 people along the way. And of course, the big one, and actually the reason that we connected, launching what we believe is going to be the largest podcast community and network that the world has ever seen, called Schenck Studios. So excited about that. And really it all begins with the Growth Now movement and the understanding that if I can live in the growth of 1% every single day, hopefully that inspires the next person, the next person, the next person. And I had no idea that my show was going to take off the way that it did, but I feel blessed and honored every day. And the business kind of grew around it.
So let's take a step back. So your show, when did the initial thought process before concept, when did you actually start? Because you've been at this for a little while. A lot of people like myself through 2020 jumped into a crowded market of the podcast world, which is millions of podcasts around the world now. And it took a lot of hard work to get where I am, and a lot of entrepreneurs, and the ones that don't put in the hours and the effort and the connection and networking are not going to strive in this industry. When did you start that? And then I'm going to talk about your first podcast, but when did the whole thought process of a podcast start with you, and where did it all begin, and where'd you get your idea from, and what initially almost enticed you to get into that field, essentially?
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny saying that I'm the OG, like one of the OGs in podcasting. Although podcasting has been around a really long time, I've been doing it for 5 years now. And that you talk about how when you get in now, it's a different game, right? So essentially, you're like, I have a podcast now, and everybody goes, "Ugh, you too." Well, 5 years ago, I was telling people I had a podcast and they had no idea what it was. Yeah, and so 100%. It was a completely different world. But from that standpoint, the idea behind it was I had listened to somebody I ended up becoming friends with, and I listened to his podcast, kind of inspired me to go, okay, I can connect with great people. And where I was in my life at that point, I was working a day job, but I had this drive and determination to be an entrepreneur. And the original thought process of why I wanted to be an entrepreneur was I wanted to show people that no matter where I came from, I could have created something great for myself. Like I wasn't a good student. My parents had their issues, all that. And we can get into those details if you want. But the idea was I wanted to be an entrepreneur so people can go, wow, Justin really made it. It was like this weird self-serving type of thing in a way. And I was like, let me start this podcast. At this point, I had 3 failed businesses under my belt. I tried to launch 3 businesses. They all failed.
Before you continue, what were those businesses?
Yeah. So the first one was actually an event business. So we put together seminars and expos that focus on personal and professional growth. Okay. The second one was a coaching business in a way where I was helping people overcome some adversity stuff because I had been through it and that failed miserably. That was probably the biggest fail. And then the third one, I tried to launch an app. By the way, if you don't have massive amounts of income to blow, don't launch an app. It's very expensive. There's a lot that goes into it.
Do you mind me asking what the app was?
Yeah, so it was called Spark. The idea behind it was, we never launched it, by the way, but we spent a ton of money trying to develop it. Yeah. And the idea was to use the app to spark a conversation. And we were going to target, by the way, if anybody wants to steal this idea, steal it. And we were going to target colleges for those introverted college freshmen who had issues making friends, because the number one reason kids dropped out of college or transferred in their freshman year was because they didn't make friends. And so the idea was, hey, these kids are tied to their tech. Let's give them an opportunity to say hello. And it wasn't necessarily a dating app, but it was set up in a similar way where you can connect with people with like-minded thought processes and dive into conversation in the app. So that was the idea behind it. Great idea. Just we never got it launched. So if you ever want to launch that, man, let me know. And
even on that note, like I've had a lot of friends in the tech. I mean, I've had friends go to Silicon Valley, just live there for 6 months to get their app up and running and try to connect with the right people. And it is such a tough industry. And you hear the ones that take off and you're like, oh my God, that guy he just got his first round. He's already at 5 million on his first round and all this investors. And it's like, that's one out of every how many hundreds of thousands or even millions are trying the exact same thing. It's almost like trying to be a pro athlete. It's so competitive, especially the last, I would say 6 to 10 years. It's insane how competitive it is. Yeah. So it was brave on your part to try to get into that. I mean, you said it because it's something that money could just drain so quickly. So quickly. And any of these 3 businesses, did you ever have partners?
So I had partners in the first and the third one. Not in the second one. It was actually the same partner, believe it or not. He was also the guy I launched the podcast with 5 years ago, and decided to end up obviously splitting. I'm still really good friends with him, but we ended up splitting because I was like, hey, this clearly isn't your passion. And it's something that I obviously really enjoyed. And so I was like, let me run with it. And that's actually when everything kind of exploded for me in the podcast space. But to get back to the original question, the idea was, let me interview entrepreneurs who figured it out so I can steal their secrets. And really learn from them and kind of instill them into my life and what I want to build and all those things. Yeah. And what ended up happening was 5 months before I launched the show, my mom actually lost a 20-year battle to opioids. And in that moment, it changed my entire perspective of life. And I realized it doesn't matter what other people think. What really matters is what do I think of myself? And am I going to actually enjoy this process of life because it's short? And we only get one of them, or, if you believe in multiple lives, you only remember one of them at a time. Right. Yeah. And so for me, it became so much more about overcoming adversity and how do you enjoy those rock bottom moments? And that's kind of why the show, I believe, took off, because it really was coming from the heart. And that's where those conversations ended up going. Instead of on the business side, we talked about life.
Yeah, it's funny you're saying that, because my podcast, or an entrepreneurial quote unquote podcast, and 90% of our podcasts are just talking about life and family and energy and just stories and like, it's crazy is that last, I would say 9 guests, I've had 6 of them cry on our podcast, just open up and cry. Wow. So we're getting into really deep conversations, which I appreciate. How old are you when your mom passed away?
I was 30. So I had just turned 30, I believe.
Okay. So was this something that you growing up was always around, or was this something later on she got into?
Yeah. So I was 12 when it started lightly. So my mom actually used to work in a pharmacy, and that's when it started. She was stealing opioids. Actually, this is part of my story I don't really share that often. She was stealing opioids from the pharmacy, ended up getting fired and got arrested for doing it. And that's how we found out that there was an issue. Like there was no outside effects, at least when I was 12, watching my mom, like she was still my mom. Right. And she ended up getting arrested for that. And that was the first thing. And she went into rehab for a little bit and came out. But it ended up going on for 20 years. And so when I was actually 19 years old, I had to move to where I live now, which is Reading, Pennsylvania, because she had lived here, but she couldn't keep a job. And so at 19, I moved here and helped her pay bills. And she lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. So I slept on the couch for like 6 or 7 months before she moved back to New Jersey. So it was always there, but not always present. And so like there was always influxes of her getting worse or getting better and getting worse and getting better. It forced me to grow up really, really fast. And so I always used to say, when I was 14, I'd rather hang out with 40-year-olds than other 14-year-olds because I enjoyed the depth of the conversation. I enjoyed the higher level type of thing. And they understood a little bit more than other 14-year-olds, kind of what I was going through. So there was empathy, there was understanding.
Yeah.
And so I grew up super fast. And I think that that's why I've been able to kind of handle a lot of the stuff and why I'm super self-aware at my age and all those other things. Not that I'm young now, but became super self-aware at a young age and have been able to navigate a lot of the things that life has kind of thrown my way.
Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I have 2 older sisters.
And what's the age gap between you guys?
So the oldest sister is 5 years older than me. My sister right above me is about 2.5. So we're about 2.5 years apart, each of us. And so when it kind of really hit the fan when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, my parents got a divorce at that age. And my sister was away at college and my other sister was about to live with her boyfriend. And so I was the one who was kind of stuck there, kind of living in it at all times. Obviously it affected them and I honor them for stepping up as the women that they are now. But it affected each of us in different phases of our life and stages of our lives, where we kind of had to navigate it in our own way. And sometimes it was an escape and sometimes it was, hey, let me try and handle this at such a young age.
Was your father present through this?
So yes, but then my dad ended up getting arrested when I was 16, I think, when I was 16 years old. So he ended up going to jail for 2 years. And that was a whole nother scenario of being forced to change schools and doing all this stuff because I had split time with both my parents, but my mom was having such a hard time keeping a job that I had to go live with my aunt and uncle for a while at 16. And so it was really this navigation of like, who am I supposed to be? Like these are the 2 people that are supposed to teach me, to guide me, to do all those things. And so I had a lot of questions of like, who am I supposed to be? Where am I going? Like how am I supposed to create the life that I want when I'm not guided by the person that's supposed to be guiding me? And so that was really, for me, the big red flags, the big question marks and all that stuff was, how do I become this person that, I've seen, I have family members that are wealthy and very successful and happily married and all the things that my parents weren't. And so I kind of looked at them, but I didn't have that roadmap of like, how do I figure that out? And so this is really the journey of the Growth Now movement, which is what you've seen unfold over the last 5 years, really.
Are you currently in a relationship?
I am. So I happily in a relationship with my girlfriend who also has 2 kids. So we live together. We just got a home back in May. In the middle of a pandemic, we decided to get a home and move into it.
How old are the little ones?
10 and 7.
And you've been together for how long?
Coming up on 2 years, actually.
Yeah. I mean, usually somebody that's been through so many different scenarios that you have been through will, as a parent, strive so much better because you have been through it. You understand the pain, you understand the suffering, you understand almost even in a way, maybe the guilt your mom may have had near the end of her life of the situation she put her children through. So understanding this all just makes, I truly believe makes you even a stronger character. And it's crazy we're having this conversation. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine this morning, actually. And it's something which I don't really tell anybody. He's going on to 15 years sober and I don't drink. I might have a quarter glass of rosé maybe twice a year. I don't drink, and everybody knows me, that surrounds me, knows I don't drink at all, right? And it just came in conversation. He was like, "Oh, you don't drink? Like, is there a reason why you don't drink?" And I never tell the story. And I told him my story where my mom grew up in Portugal, so European families, divorce was never. You don't hear old European families, you stuck together, good or bad, right. You hate each other, you stuck together. Her parents, at a very young age, she was maybe 7 or 8, divorced. My grandfather was a raging alcoholic. He came from a family of 11 boys and 1 girl. So of 12 children, out of the 12 children, 7 of them all ended up passing away as alcoholics. My grandfather died as an alcoholic. So at a young age, my mom's mom, so my grandmother, decided that she couldn't live in that situation. She left, and she left my mom there with her dad, which is abusive, alcoholic. Wow. So my mom ended up going from grandparents to aunts. She was just jumping around house to house growing up. And growing up, when she became a mom, it's just like all that she understood. And it was the pure opposite. She wanted to give so much more love because she didn't have it. And as a child, when you're 16, 17, you're drinking, you're playing around with with stuff. You're experimenting life. And I remember coming home one day. I was maybe like 17 or something, and I remember seeing my mom, and I knew the story, but I really didn't know the depth part of the story with her. And she was like, it's in our bloodline. We have had so many I have cousins that are alcoholics. I had so many, and my biggest fear is that you're going to continue down that path. And that moment at 17, I still remember the day. I just clicked in my head. I didn't want to see my mom suffer and see my mom in pain because of me. And from that day on, I didn't drink. And until this day, like I said, I might on New Year's Eve have like a quarter glass of rosé or something. Like I don't drink, and it's got to the point where I don't have no taste buds. Like the taste of beer grosses me out, right?
Yeah.
So it's that lessons that you're going to be teaching your kids and your stepkids that are just going to make them stronger individuals, stronger and better human beings. So I appreciate that aspect of it. So is your father still around?
He is. Yeah. So one thing I do want to share.
Yeah.
What's that? I'm sorry.
Sorry. Go continue. I apologize. Continue.
So one thing I do want to share with my parents never figured out life, right? Like they didn't figure out how to become successful from a business standpoint. They didn't understand how to successfully make their marriage work. And we can get into that here in a second. But the reality is my parents loved me and my sisters unconditionally. And so when people kind of look at me and my sisters and they go, well, how did you turn out okay? Yeah. That's the only thing that I can point to is that, yes, my parents screwed up time and time again, but they loved us unconditionally. My mom was my favorite person till the day she died, like my absolute favorite person on this planet. And I'm very, very close with my dad now, although we didn't talk for 7.5 years at one point, but we're very, very close because there was always that love and support. And like, why do I have these crazy big dreams? Because my parents told me that I could, even at a young age, like you can do whatever you want. Like it was instilled in my head, that's awesome. Even though my parents didn't know how to do it for themselves. And so yeah, like I feel really blessed from that standpoint. And my heart hurts for those kids who live in a home where there is no love and there is no understanding and there is no teaching and there is no mentorship and there is none of that. Because I certainly didn't miss that part of life. Like there was constant love in my life, which I love that is a blessing. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate you being open with that too. And I think that's very, very important as well. And that can even go down to even future for parents that are listening to this. And that's something we talked about. And it's something I have a passion for. I try to help as many entrepreneurial dads as I possibly can. And it's understanding two things, that being present doesn't mean anything. I mean, obviously you came from a broken situation, but your love of your parents still guides you to do the right thing. So being present and showing the love. And in reality is when you're young, all you want is to be loved. Kids don't care about presents. And I always say this, like you give a gift to a kid and they're more happy that you have rewarded them and acknowledged them and showing them that you appreciate them. That's what they relate to that gift. They're not relating that gift as anything else. The gift means nothing to them. In a week or two, they don't even look at that gift anymore. So that's one thing. And I don't know if we talked about this before, is I reward my kids with time. And it's something I've been doing for years and years and years. When my daughter gets an A in school or does something good, I'll pull her out of school the next day. I'm like, let's go chill out and let's go get your nails done. Let's go have lunch together. So I reward her in time because I want to build those memories, because knock on wood, something were to happen to me, I want her to have a memory bank of good times we had together, not gifts that she's not going to ever look at ever again. Right. So that's very important as well, because those memory banks are just this all you have. And I'm sure there's probably tons of memories of things that times that you've had with your parents, even though you went through rough situations, that are just memorable, right? They're just locked in of times you smiled and had joy in your life. So I appreciate that.
For sure.
So your podcast, who was your first guest you had on?
First guest was sorry,
go, continue.
First guest was a local entrepreneur named Pam Gockley. She was the first guest on the show. And fun fact about that, I now post-record every intro, because when I went to intro her for the show, I mispronounced the title of her book. And the first 5 minutes of the episode, we're talking about the book that I mispronounced. And so from that, like literally, I'm now 360 plus episodes in, and I still post-record the intro because of that moment.
I love that part. That part. Show memories. Give me a few memories of past shows that just have locked in your head, or something a guest has said, or something that has happened that you're just like, wow. I've pre-recorded just under 100 episodes, and I probably have a ton already. So you must have a ton, but I have a ton of moments I'm just like, wow, that just happened, or that guy just said that. So is there any moments that just lock in your head and like, wow, like I can't believe that guest opened up that way, or they said that, or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many for different reasons, right? Like one, I'm trying to think. I mean, Fabio Viviani, for instance. So he was from America's Top Chef. He owns about 35.
Yeah, I know who he is, of course. Yeah,
really, really good human being. And I saw him speak at an event, and I remember not caring about him before the event because I was like, who cares about a chef? I don't watch TV. I didn't know who he was. Saw him speak, and I turned to my friend and I said, I need to be friends with that guy. Like, he just blew me away. And about a year and a half after that, he was on the show. And, sometimes, I mean, 350 plus, I don't keep in touch with all my guests. I keep in touch with a lot of them, but not all of them. He's still to this day one of my best friends. And here's what happened. I interviewed him. And after the interview, he goes, "You're really good at this. Who do you want to interview?" I was like, I didn't expect this question. I don't even know how to respond to this. He ended up writing 50 individual emails introducing me to celebrities, massive entrepreneurs. Like Andy Frisella was one of the introductions, and people like that.
Wow.
And it was like, I think for me, that was right before Inc. magazine listed me as a top 8 podcast. And I think for me, like that was one of those moments of like, okay, I'm on the right track. Like I'm doing the right thing. So that one always stands out for me. And again, like I said, he's one of my best friends to this day. Ed Milet cried on my show. And that was something where I was like, this is crazy because this guy has done countless interviews. And somebody I've admired and followed for a long time. And to see him get that emotional, telling a story that I was able to get to while we were chatting. And that was a huge moment. Chris Van Vliet, who, if you're a wrestling fan, he has a YouTube channel that has 1 million subs and he talks about wrestling, interviews wrestlers. So fun fact about me, as I'm a wrestling fan, like WWE wrestling.
I can see by the smile on your face right now. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a second, but go continue.
I love it. So he's got a huge
and
YouTube
Milet
channel.
is a massive. I've interviewed a ton of I just had Tim Story on my podcast last week.
That's huge.
And huge. And it's crazy. I have a clip in there that during the podcast, he stopped and he's like, I've been interviewed by by Larry King Live 7 times. And he goes, your manner, the way you talk, the way you ask questions. He goes, you remind me of him. I'm like, what did you just say? I have those in my clip. I'm like, that's incredible. So it was just really, really cool. So you have these moments, right? But Ed is just hands down of all the people that you listen to and there's so much fluff out there. There's so much bullshit. Ed is one of those guys where he's the type of person you want to hang out with. I always bring people on my podcast that I want to hang out with. Like you, I don't even drink, but I grab a drink with or go chill and go hang out with. I want to bring people that I want to have a conversation with. Yeah. And even if I've had opportunities to get a lot of big names, but I knew they wouldn't be the right interview, or I've brought in people who I think are going to be the right interview. Then I have them on and they're just these dry, want to talk about myself, talk about my product. And I hate that. So, and I don't allow that. I literally just do not allow that. And I don't know if that brushes them off or not, but Ed's a big, that's a really, and again, I'm going to cry, man. He's a legit good person. Everybody that says that and knows him. So I appreciate that. Who else? Yeah.
So the Chris Van Vliet thing, which is crazy. I reached out to him on Instagram and I was like, hey man, I'd love to interview you. Because I love your interview style. Like obviously I've had WWE wrestlers on my show and announcers and stuff like that, but I can't really talk about wrestling. It's not my audience.
Yeah. Of course.
I'd love to talk about interviewing. And he goes, oh my God, I'd love to. I love your podcast. So it was like this weird, we both were fanboys of each other and now we've become friends because of it. So just so many moments. I mean, Trent Shelton was absolutely phenomenal. And these are a lot of people that I still talk to this day. I can text Ed and he texts me back and just weird things. And so I think realistically, whenever I have that genuine connection with any of them beyond just, hey, this is an interview. Hey, this is an opportunity for you to spread your word or your message or sell your thing. Any moment where you have that specific connection, and you can build a relationship. I mean, it touches my heart. I'm blown away every time. Anytime somebody I admire says yes to come on the show or we connect, I'm blown away every time.
Yeah. And when you started your podcast, you said you brought it in as something you wanted to do, something you enjoyed. Did you have other angles of it? Did you have another mindset? I wanted to build besides building my network, I wanted to lead it to another business. Where was your mindset when you first started?
Yeah, I think there was a small want and desire to, use it to build a brand, to speak more, stuff like that. But I didn't think it could happen. I was very, at the time I talked down on myself. I didn't really think that highly of myself in a sense of like, oh, I could be that person. And so, yes, there was that, okay, that'd be cool if, but it wasn't like, oh, here's my goal. Like that wasn't the main thing. I think that was a byproduct of being really genuine and knowing that I'm living in my purpose and sharing these important stories. That became the byproduct. Now I can look back and go, if I really wanted to write a cool story and say, hey, like I wanted to build this massive brand and I started this podcast and here's the steps and the tricks and I can't do that because it wasn't the ultimate goal. And so obviously it's changed over time. Now I'm a little bit more intentional about how my messaging is coming across and all those things and like how much I'm highlighting myself and my guests at the same time and all that stuff. But that comes with the evolution of you as a human, the evolution of a businessman, the evolution of a podcast host. That just happens. I'm just more intentional about it. But there was anything other than connecting with really cool people and learning from them so I can instill that into a business I wanted to build. I didn't think I'd be the podcast guy. I didn't think I'd be building out Winject Studios. I didn't think I'd be teaching some of the biggest influencers in the world how to podcast on a different level, which I do. Like, I didn't think any of that stuff. Like, podcasting accidentally became my life based off of just diving in and loving the craft and the conversation.
I appreciate that. Like I said, when I came into this, and we talked about this before, I did have an intention with my podcast. I didn't want to monetize from it. I didn't want anything. The podcast was essentially to build me as a brand because I've been an entrepreneur for 25 years. And besides my world, nobody knew who I was. So I was like, okay, I got to build a brand. How am I going to do that? I got to get in front of audiences. And how am I going to get in front of audiences? I need to have a platform that's big enough that people that have influence, I'm giving them a platform. So that was the idea, was let me build this platform, let me network. But it quickly turned into like, I'm really enjoying this. I'm really enjoying conversations. I'm really enjoying meeting people. I'm really enjoying, and through the podcast, I've met probably about a handful of guys that like we talk on like 3-4 times a week now, like become really, really tight friends, like Mike Diamond, Adam Jablin. Like there's so many guys that we've become this little community and we're always talking. Your partner, Chris Ross, like I was just this morning with, like, you build these networks and start hanging out with these guys. And it just becomes this little, it's almost like I find and the world is so big, but once you get into certain communities, it becomes very small. Yeah. And like Brian Bogart and you really connect with these great hearted, like yourself, individuals that all have the same mindset, the same path, the same vision, and everybody wants to help each other. There's no real, like, I've networked everybody. Like the amount of people I'm like, when I meet people, I'm like, okay, I'm going to network you. It's just part of it. Right. And my biggest mindset with networking is, I always say this, is by me networking you with another individual, no matter what, if you guys become best friends and take off and run 5 businesses together, I'm always your anchoring point. You guys are always, remember, Jeff anchored you. So I have no regrets in doing that, right? So I think that's a huge, huge part of it. Let's talk about your wrestling. WWE, you said, right? WWF. Yeah. You're original wrestling guy, I'm assuming.
Original. So grew up watching WWF. I was never a WCW guy. Became WWE. But I will say this, I'm now into AEW. And I don't know if you know that. It's new. So Cody Rhodes, I can't believe I'm geeking out over wrestling.
No, let's go. So I know Cody Rhodes is, yeah, he's
the son of Dusty Rhodes. He left WWE and started his own company, and the guy who's funding it is billionaire Tony Khan, who owns the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Oh, interesting.
He funds it, and it's phenomenal, and it's more definitely the older late 90s, early 2000s style when WWF was huge.
Yeah, that's what I grew up.
That style.
Yeah.
And it's just great and fun to watch and see them bringing in some of the old guys, like Jake the Snake Roberts is a manager within the organization and stuff like that. So just a ton of fun. Yeah, man.
That was really, my era.
It's my escape.
My era was the WWF and I'm a little older than you, but it was Saturday nights. So this is even, how old are you?
36.
So I just turned 44 the other day. So I'm 8 years older than you, 7.5, 8 years older than you. So Saturday night, back then it would have the normal wrestling. And then every Saturday night, they would have a main event at 11 at night. Yeah. And it was on cable TV. And that was the only time when big names would fight each other. That was before like WrestleManias and all that stuff. So I would fall asleep on the couch and my mom and my dad would wake me up at 11 o'clock. There was no PBR. There was no taping back then. They'd wake me up to watch it live, and I'd rub my eyes half asleep, but I would watch it all. And I was probably maybe 8, 9 years old, whatever, watching this. And it was just such great memories, right? Of all those classic wrestlers that a lot of them have passed away. Like in my office here, I can't turn the camera. I got this massive poster of and it's actually WWF poster, the Hart Foundation, signed by Anvil, Bret the Hitman Hart, and their manager, God, what's his name? My head just drew a blank with the glasses.
I know who Teddy Hart,
with the mic.
Yeah, the Mouth of the South. What's
Mouth
his name?
of the South. Yeah,
that guy. Yeah.
I can't Mouth of the South. Right But I have a poster signed by all three of them in my office here. But it's that was awesome. That was a huge thing growing up. That was a big part of it, right? After I got to a certain age, I never really followed it on. And it's funny because my wife now watches a reality show, the Bella Twins, which is, I guess, I sit down and watch it with her, and it brings back brings back some of the wrestlers. But there's a great documentary. I don't know if you saw that with Jake the Snake and Diamond Dallas Page when he kind of helped them. Such an amazing documentary.
Yeah, another one too that's kind of based around wrestling. Now, obviously, you didn't really watch in this era, but David Arquette, the actor.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that one.
Phenomenal, just how they dive in.
He's very talented. I mean, he's had his issues, but he's a very, very talented. I'm surprised that's somebody you try to get on your podcast.
I haven't gotten him yet. It's funny because Chris has had him on, Chris Van Vliet, and so I was like, dude, I'm not big on reaching out to somebody and saying, hey, can you introduce me? I don't do that. Yeah. But I was like, do you mind if I drop your name? And so I've done that. So there's some light conversation to have him on. I think that would just be a phenomenal conversation to have, just because he is an intriguing human being. Very, very intriguing. Very intriguing. He's been through, like I said, he's had obviously his addictive issues and stuff like that, but he's such a talented young man still. And he is quite young still. Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty crazy. And did you hear yesterday, this is going off. I mean, by the time this is released, it'll be a couple weeks ahead, but this is our time too. Saved by the Bell. He passed away yesterday. And why am I bringing it back to big wrestling? Because he was on that reality show, the wrestling reality show. Do you know that? Oh, that is right. So I didn't watch that. So that's part of wrestling I don't love. But I do remember him kind of being on that. But yeah, Dustin Diamond, cancer. Like it was like 3 weeks. He got diagnosed, and 3 weeks later he passed away. Actually, my best friend who lives in LA is Mario Lopez's kid's private choreographer. So he teaches them hip hop dance and stuff like that. Oh, very cool. And Mario Lopez was AC Slater on Saved by the Bell. So yeah, of course, I follow him on Instagram. And so that's how I found out about it. I was like, oh damn, that sucks. He was on 44 years old. So your age. He was quite young. So let's get back into your story. So started the podcast, got on to Inc. magazine, had a little jump there, took on your partner had left, you could really strive this business and you really started focusing. When did you start actually turning it around and using it as an educational platform to teach other people how to run a proper podcast and all like that? Because there is a need right now, because there's a lot of people jumping on board and they don't know what to set up. Like I've been a guest on 44 or 5 podcasts in the last 4 months. And I see their setups and they don't even have a background, or they don't, it's just, there's no professionalism of it. Just there with the little mic and they're talking at you. I'm like, and as the interviews, when we were done, I'm like, you should do this. I'm trying to give them advice that just make present themselves a little bit more professional, because people are going to take them at a higher level if you could present yourself to be more professional. I'm all about branding, right? That's my background. So when did you turn around and say, I got to start helping people? And when did you actually take that into action? Yeah, again, that's a great question, because that was never my plan. My plan was never to be the podcast guy or to help people in podcasting. So my show had started taking off before Inc. magazine. So after my co-host had stepped away, or we had a conversation, he stepped away, it started to grow organically. And I realized it's because my branding and my messaging finally aligned. There wasn't this other voice clouding everything that was happening. Yeah. And so it started to grow organically. I was getting some traction. Even to the point where I was getting recognized at an airport here and there, and weird stuff like that. Yeah. And I went to an event in Ohio, and I had helped some people for free before, but I went to an event in Ohio and I was talking about my podcast with somebody, and somebody overheard me and said, yo, I need to pick your brain. Nobody listens to my podcast. I need to learn how to grow it. And so he ended up hiring me as a coach. He was the first person to really pay me. Some people have paid me like little pennies, but he was the first person to really pay me. Fun fact, it's Adam Shively. He's now my business partner with Winject Studios.
Okay.
And so I helped him grow his podcast from literally about 36 downloads to getting ranked on iTunes and thousands of downloads an episode and all these things. And that's where it began. Like he then started telling people and people started coming to me, and that's really where it began. It happened by accident. And it's still a big part of what I do, but it's not really forward facing. Like very rarely am I the podcast guy in public. So like you're not going to tune into my show and go, the 5 steps to grow your podcast. That's not on the podcast. Yeah. But if you come to my virtual event, which this will probably come out after my virtual event, but come to the virtual event, I'll teach you about podcasting. There's a part in that. Right. And so it's just part of like, this is a great marketing arm, a great branding tool. And it's evolved over the last 5 years. It's really evolved over the last 3 years, really, of how to utilize your podcast. But for me, it's something I love. Like podcasting is my passion. And so I think it'll always be a part of what I do. It's just never really the forward facing thing, but people tend to find me and go, hey, teach me. And I go, cool, here's my fee. And they pay me and then I teach them. And so it's really kind of this funny way that has evolved. The other things in my life and my business, like retreats and my live events, that's very intentional. That's very brand driven. Yeah. But the podcasting is really this underlying undertone of like, hey, okay, that's your expertise. My coach actually said to me, he worded it perfectly. I'm going to mess it up. But he's like, that's your expertise. That's the thing that's so easy for you that you should charge stupid money to people to learn from you because it's that easy for you. And it like kind of shifted. It's funny because it's kind of shifted my thought process on if you're the expert, like the thing that's so easy for you is probably really hard for everybody else. Yeah. So jack your prices up. But look, here's the thing. I fell in love with the medium because of the human connection that was happening. Yeah. And then what happened was my audience grew and I started to make an impact in their life. Like I've had 5 people reach out to me and say, because of your podcast, I decided not to take my life. And I realized that these messages and these stories have to be shared to help the world heal, to help the world grow, to help the world, whatever it is. Right. And so when you think about Winject Studios, you think about the collective impact. The idea is long-term, we want to lift everybody's brand by one person helping the other person reach the next level, right? And it's really about that collective impact of making the world a better place. And so every time I help somebody launch a show or grow a show or change their brand of a show, I look at it like I'm changing the world just a little bit. Even if it's that one person who hears it and says, this changed my life, I have my hand in something that said, okay, we changed a life in a good way. And so every single thing that I do, again, whether it's the events, the retreats, whatever, it's really about improving life a tiny bit for one person. And then hopefully we have that domino effect of helping the next, helping the next, helping the next. And so I've really fallen in love with the idea that a word or a message or a story can change somebody else's life. And podcasting is the ultimate medium to be able to do that.
I love that. I love everything you said there because it is so true. If you have that mindset of helping one person at a time, and this came very evident to me it was about a year ago, maybe it was about a year ago. I was listening to, I wouldn't even say I'm a podcaster, but he's more of an interviewer. I was listening to him and he was doing an IG live and this lady came up on stage and he just brought her up and she said, I just wanted to thank you. Obviously you'll obviously know his name, Evan Carmichael. Mm-hmm. And she said, Evan, I just want to say thank you to you. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. And he's like, he had no clue who she was. And she said, roughly 8 years ago, you put up a video and she named the video. And she goes, I was going through a very rough time in my life. And my husband had left me. I had cancer. I was fighting for my life. I wanted to give up. And she goes, I watched your video and I watched it over and over and over. And it just gave me enough inspiration to keep doing that. She goes, and she said, like, I run my own business. I'm healthy. She went through all these and Evan was like quiet. And she's like, is this video? And Evan went back and checked that video. Back then that video had maybe like 10 hits when she actually saw it. So wow. That impact of one person changed the course of her life by that one message. So hearing that, it's so important for people to understand what you said. And it's something that I try to do even as a dad. Like I'm trying to put all these messages as a father because I've studied parenthood for the last like 12 years. I've actually studied, I've embedded my mind into it, but at the same time too, building as many companies as I can and being successful. So find that harmony and balance, or I would call it more of a harmony between family and being a successful entrepreneur. And if I could just help one single person, and I took that mission even like 3 years ago. I took on 3 years ago, Justin, I've taken on 64 entrepreneurs. I've never charged a penny, all under me. And I've built them in a few of them. I'm going to start releasing actually little testimonials. Some of them are 7-8 figure companies now from ground zero. And I never charged a penny. And it was only this December I actually started, because I was getting so overwhelmed. I've actually started charging clients to have one-on-one training and whatnot. But it's just being able to give back and have that mindset that through our messages and through our platforms, and I think Brian Bogart says it perfectly, is really 99% of your work is going to be given for free, and understanding that. And as long as you have that mindset where you're just helping impact one person at a time in the world, I mean, we're doing great things, and I think you're doing an amazing thing. So I appreciate that aspect of it. So through the process, let's talk about a couple more things before we end it here. Your retreats and your virtual events, when did that all start? What's that all about? Because I have interest in that, because I like learning about that stuff. So let's talk about that. How did that all start, and when did it all start?
Yeah, so it's funny because I told you my first failed business was events. Like,
I know. That's why I was interested. You got back into it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've always liked the idea of, I think it was 10 years ago that we had that company, and this is before social media was used to advertise anything. It's part of the reason it failed, all that stuff. So I think back then, 10 years ago, was because I wanted to speak. I wanted to be a speaker. I wanted to share my story. I wanted to be the person on stage. And so I was like, hey, why don't I create something where I can be on stage? And I never did anything at these events that we did other than MC. Like I was never the speaker. I was never the teacher, because I also realized that I was 24 at the time. And when I was 24, I looked like I was 9. And so I was like, I don't know who's going to listen to me if I'm sharing something here. And so let me work with other people who are definitely the experts and put that together. And so I was always in love with not only speaking, but also attending live events and learning and being able to connect with other human beings that were like-minded and all this stuff. And that's really where the obsession started. Was I went to these events all over the country, and I just loved the connection and the relationships that I was building. And then I started speaking at some of these events that I attended, a year or two prior. And it was like this crazy thing. Yeah. And as my show grew, I realized that there was this community that I didn't really know. Like, podcasting's weird. Like, there's tens of thousands of people that listen. Like, I have over 2 million downloads of my show, right? I'd never met any of them. Very rarely do I hear anything, and all these things, like, from every episode I get 1 or 2 reach outs. That's about it. That's not 2 million. It's like, so I'm like, okay, like, what's going on? And so I was like, what would happen if I do an event? Let's see what happens. And I tied a deeper meaning to the event itself, which is Growth Now Movement Live. The first one we did was 2019. And I was like, look, my ultimate goal, and still is for Growth Now Movement Live, is I want to fill an arena of 6,000 people here in my hometown of Reading, Pennsylvania. Now, it has plenty of roadblocks. There's no airport here. You have to, literally the closest airport's an hour away. So you're renting a car, because if you Uber, it costs as much as the flight one way. All these things. And so, but when there's a greater meaning to what you're building, people find a way. And so year one, people came from 14 states in Canada to attend. I was building up to 2020, which my goal was to double it in size. I wanted to go from 150 to 300 attendees. And I was on pace to do it. I was going to hit it. We already had 16 states in Canada as we were headed to 2020. And I was like, oh, let's get to 20 states. That'd be cool. And what ended up happening was COVID, right? And so we kind of did a shift to virtual events. But for me, it was really about community. Like, who are these people that are listening? What is it that they really want? Like, how can I connect with them? How can I hug them? How can I high five them? How can I hang out with them and do all those things? And my events are really like 1.5 day long rock concerts. It's not like a seminar. You're not coming in a suit and a tie and taking a bunch of notes. Like, you're learning, you're connecting, but you're having a ton of fun. Actually, for the 2020 event, which didn't happen, I rented out a baseball stadium for the after party. So we have like a minor league baseball team here that feeds into the Philadelphia Phillies. And like, they have this really cool stage area, and I rented the whole thing out. Like, it was going to be a bash for the after party. And that fell through. But for me, it was really about, now what it's about is about connecting with community, and then seeing other communities built from the community that I've built. And so I've seen masterminds get launched. I've seen people join each other's groups. I've seen people launch podcasts together that have come to my events, whether it be virtual or in person. that for me is what it's about, right? When you talk about impact and collective impact, that's a huge impact.
Yeah,
like these
massive.
people come to my event and go, well, if this idiot could do it, I could do it too. Great. That's exactly what I want you to think. And I want you to go do it. Right. And I want this impact to be massive. And that's really what I'm all about. And so we're hoping by the end of 2020, what year are we in? 2021. I'm hoping September of 2021, we can do a live event again. That's the goal. To come back together and have a good time and connect and grow and learn and do all those things. But that's really what it is for me, is about community and connection.
Yeah. I mean, you have a clear picture and a clear purpose to it. I think once you could actually have that focus, everything else just comes together. So I think that's a huge part of it. And I like your mindset too with it too. And I like how you're keeping it in your community and giving back to the community and stuff like that. So when you have guests, like your first show, your first event, I should say, how many speakers did you have on there? Was it you? How many?
I had 7. I spoke along with 7 other keynotes. Okay. And I had 15 what I refer to as movement makers, and so there were panels throughout the event that focused on different things. Like one was focused on wellness, one focused on mindset, one focused on business, and so they were panelists. And these are all people that I've been able to build relationships with, because my keynotes were Fabio Viviani from America's Top Chef, who we mentioned earlier, Albie Manzo from Real Housewives of New Jersey, Sarah Centrello, who's like a New York Times bestselling author. Like it was massive speakers for year one. It was crazy, and so I was like, well, how do I do this for year 2? And year 2, the lineup was insane as well, until we had to move some stuff around. But, it was one of those things where like, I was like, these people I've connected with, I want to put them on a platform, especially the movement makers. When you look at them, like I was like, let me put them on a platform to raise them up. So it was always about, again, still going back to that community thing. But yeah, I mean, the speakers were the fun part, right? Like, who do I want to hang out with? Who have I connected on the podcast that I want to hang out with in person? And so that's kind of how I pieced it together, which is kind of crazy to think about.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you said it was a 3-day event. So when somebody, just for the audience to know, if anybody wants to run an event or anything like this. So if somebody is trying to put an event together, and I think the easiest way to truly network and have people around you is to run events. There's a gentleman named Dan Fleshman. Do you know who he is?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And when you hear him talk, he's one thing he's very, very passionate about. He's like, throw an event and be the center of the event, because now you're essentially bringing everybody together. Everybody knows you. It's such a great way to network, such a great way to build yourself as a brand. And then once you do a successful event, the second one comes easier. Third, obviously you went through roadblocks with the rest of the world with COVID, but obviously if that didn't happen, I mean, I'm sure it would have been a massive success, and it would just keep growing and growing and growing. And we're actually part of an event here in Toronto, Canada. One of my companies is a massive sponsor, but I try to help out. It's called Fight to End Cancer, and it's a very cool. This Jennifer Huggins is a great entrepreneur. She does this event where she gets corporate individuals that never boxed in their life, and they go through a 3-month boot camp, and then they fight. And it's amazing. A black tie, $800 a ticket, and it just sells out. Massive sponsors, and they train for 3 months, and they go in there and they have a pro fight. They actually get licensed, and they get a pro fight. So it's a crazy little event, and all the money and she raises always minimal, $250,000 a year towards cancer research and stuff like that. So wow. It's a different aspect of it, but it's just there's a lot of work going into events. So when you're doing your event, how many months does it take you to prep for it and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So the first one, it took me 12 months. I mean, it took me a whole year.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was really about piecing together everything, feeling comfortable in the fact that, okay, I can sell it out. When do I start announcing? And, from the first conversation I had to launch, it was about 12 and a half months. Yeah. And the first conversation I had was somebody I actually respect in my local community. And I said, here's what I'm thinking about doing. Does it make sense to do it here? The second conversation was with Fabio, and I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this event. Would you? And I didn't even get to finish. He goes, whatever you're doing, I'm in. And so that was like the universe nod saying, go ahead and do it. Yeah. And so then I was like, okay, well, how do I find a venue? Guess what? Reading, Pennsylvania has got really cool venues, but they have very limited venues. And so it was about aligning, like, when does it make sense and when does it not? Yeah. Year 2 from when it became a focus to when we were going to launch, probably about 8 months. Yeah. And then the goal was to always shorten it every year, because once you get the word of mouth behind it, it's not as much of a focus as it has to be. But I mean, dude, year 1, like, yes, my podcast does really, really well, but I sold those tickets one by one. it was one-on-one conversations of like, hey, I know it sounds like a crazy idea, but I promise you it's going to be worth it. You need to come.
What did you charge the first year?
So I had a 3-tier system. So I had a general admission, which I believe the first year was $97. Yeah. There was a VIP, which was $297. That included like a VIP party and stuff like that. And then there was a mastery level ticket, which was $2,000, which involved a mastermind the day after the event with the speakers and the movement makers.
That's cool. Yeah. It's a lot of moving parts, man. It's a lot of moving parts to put an event together. And then even when it comes together, it's almost like your wedding day, like shit happens and you just got to go with the fly and go. And I'm saying that because when I got married, I've been married now for 17 plus years, and our wedding day, our limos never showed up. The guy that company that we rented limos for, it was the same weekend. It was a wedding show, and they ended up putting them on display and didn't bring us limos. So we were scrambling around trying to get around. So it's just things happen when you're dealing with an event, right? And that's just of a small scale. So is there any moments that happened on your first or second year that you were just like, whoa, and obviously you just threw by it, but any moments that you could recollect and be like, oh my God, that was scary when that happened?
It's crazy. So I'm really big on visualization. It's something I do every single day, and I do it to the point where I can like hear, smell, taste it all. Right.
Yeah.
And so when the event came, I wasn't nervous the day of the event because I had visualized it. I've done it 10,000 times in my head. Like it was done.
I'm like that too.
The only thing that was off from what I visualized to what actually was put together were the screens that were on the stage were a lot smaller than I thought they were going to be. Like, and if that's all I had to worry about, great. So it was a good start. And then there were 2 technical glitches throughout the event. So I had dancers dance the speakers up to the stage during the event itself. And during that time, there was like promo videos of like fun reels with like music and stuff like that of the speaker. And those got glitchy because I guess the internet wasn't great in the hotel.
Yeah.
And then Fabio, when he was speaking, his microphone went out halfway through.
Oh wow!
But he's done it so many times, he just kept going. Nobody even noticed but me. And so what I realized was there's certain things that are going to go wrong, but people don't realize they're going wrong. And so those are my 2 like
as long as the show must go on, right? Is one of those things.
That's it. I was just glad it was him up on the stage and not me, because I would have been like, why is my microphone not working? What's going on? So it all worked out. And there was definitely no scary moments. I did have a reoccurring nightmare leading up to it that I was standing at the registration table. By the way, I didn't work my own registration table, but in this dream, I was at the registration table and nobody was showing up. And so that was my reoccurring dream building up to it. But the crazy thing is, man, I sold 175 tickets and 160 people were there.
Which is really good.
It's crazy good.
Yeah.
It was like
they say most events, even though you sell the tickets, you always have a 30% no-show. That's the average on most events, which is, so 175, you're looking at about 30, 35. Yeah. So that's a good number.
Yeah. I was pretty stoked about that.
Was it a lot of local or people that came in from out of town?
It was a good mix. I would say it was about 55% local, 45% traveled in from out of town.
So a lot of them came. Did you align like pickup vehicles and all that kind of stuff?
No, they were on their own to get in. Obviously, I had room blocks at the hotel and stuff like that, so they didn't have to worry about any of that stuff. And I worked a great rate out, but they had to find their way. Now, a lot of the people came from like New York, New Jersey, so Maryland. Drivable. Yeah, but I mean, I had people from the West Coast of Canada. I had people from California. I had people from Texas. I had people from Chicago. So, I mean, those
are the most special ones, huh? When they fly in, they came out of it. Like that means a lot.
It means so much. Like literally for them to fly in, then rent a car, drive an hour plus to the hotel and where I was hosting it. Like the fact that they would even do that, like I was just honored. You know what I mean? And my whole thing is like, I hope whatever trouble you went through to get there, hopefully a 10X delivered on whatever that trouble was, whatever you spent on it, however you look and go, this was the worst part about it. I hope my delivery was 10X, whatever the worst part was. That's always my goal.
Yeah, I love that. So let's quickly talk about your virtual one this year. When's the date? Is it February something or is it March?
Yeah, it's February 18th and 19th.
So we're coming right around the corner. A lot of individuals I talk to that have gone to the virtual, like I had on last week, John Lee, and he just ran a virtual event where in person he would have about 600 people. Virtually, I think he had like 1,800 people. So it could be an actual positive thing where you could impact a lot more people. You get a lot more people on. Have you seen it as more of a positive thing? Have you been able to get out as much digitally to as many faces as possible? How does that all work?
Yeah, so really good question. So last September, I did a virtual event. And the reason I did it because I was like, people bought tickets to my event for last year that never happened. And I was like, and I had to push it for a second time. And so finally I was like, look, I'll throw this on top of it. It's free to you guys. I did charge for that virtual event, the last one. Yeah. And so the main thing for me is I didn't want to do virtual because it's all about community for me. So how do I build community in a virtual setting? Yeah. So I found Excel Events, which is a hosting platform that I use. And it creates an opportunity for people to connect through like speed dating and networking and stuff like that. And so I utilized that within the event. And dude, it's crazy. I've seen businesses launch from my virtual event back in September because they connected and said, hey, let's stay connected. And cool. Businesses have launched because of it. So I was really happy about that. I'm doing it again. This time it's free. I'm expecting about 500 registrations, which I'm pretty happy with. Yeah. But my thing is this, I don't want cheap registrations. I don't want people to sign up just because they want to sign up. I want people to sign up and show up. And so to give you an example, the last one, I had 180 people register. During the event itself, 170 something people were active during the event. It means they were there, they were watching, they were typing, they were doing all that stuff. And so the goal is, hey, if I can get 500 people registered the right way, I'm hoping to 400 plus people are actually going to be there and active and involved in the whole thing. Not just, oh, I'm here to see one of the speakers. I don't want that. I want community. And so my approach is very holistic when I talk about it. Yeah. Yes, we have, Chris talking about the win-win effect. We have, individuals talking about how to TEDx speak. I'm going to be talking about podcasting. I'm going to be talking about, or somebody's going to be talking about writing a book and self-publishing on your own. Chandler Bolt's going to come and talk about that. And so all these things, right? Great. If you sign up because of Chandler Bolt, I want you to stay the whole time because of Justin Schenck or because of Chris or because of Brian Bogert. I want you there the whole time. And so I have a very holistic approach to the event. So it's a little bit different. So pluses and minuses. Pluses, here's the plus for me. For the people who truly can't afford to get to the live event, here's an opportunity for you to connect with the network that I've been able to build out. That's really
you said
the
this
only
platform.
plus.
So you're not charging anything for this event. You said
it's free. Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So totally free. I do have some sponsors.
Yeah.
So that obviously helps out
100%.
A little. Will this come out after my event?
When's your event?
18th and 19th of February. Probably.
You know what? I could push this. What I'll do is I'm going to push this for, I could push this till next Wednesday. I have an opening next Wednesday. I'll do that just to help you with your event. So we'll do that and we'll push it, promote the event. I'll do that for you. Because we get a lot of downloads, and then that's through my actual email list, right? So we think we talked about this. I built this email list over by 15 years of just being an entrepreneur. And that email list is just what's driven the podcast, right? So it's been really nicely going and then getting the right guest on. And you know what, do you find this? I'm going to ask you as a podcast host, it's not always the biggest guests that get the biggest reaction. Like I'll give you an example. I had a gentleman, an entrepreneur from Nigeria, and just a gentleman, we connected through IG. We just hit it off, just became friends. I'm like, let's bring you on the podcast. His podcast, he pushed it. And when you get your chartable rankings in Nigeria for 2 weeks, I was ranked number 1 in business.
Wow.
I got 27,000 downloads all from Nigeria within a week period. And it was the most blown out thing ever. And it's crazy the power. And then I've had other individuals, I'm not going to name names, that are just have millions of followers, and they're on, and we have this great conversation, and they're in tears and all this stuff, and they love me to death. And then once it's done, they don't even promote it. They don't push it. They don't do nothing. Yep. So do you realize that too?
Yeah. Now here's the thing too, right? So like you have a big name on your show. They've done 1,000 other podcasts. Yeah. So their audience already has heard the story. So
but I always do. That's one thing is I actually go other places with that. I know what their story is. So I make sure I don't go there. So I make sure I always don't go there.
I'm very much the same way.
I love that.
And so there's a utilization tool that I'll share on here if you don't mind. So people listening that are podcasters, I actually specifically pull something out that was really, really good on my specific interview with them. Yeah. And I say, my audience is loving this one specific thing. The world needs to hear about this. And so therefore it gives them the motivation to go push it. And so, Ed Milet's a really good example. And this just speaks to him as a human being. He shared my interview out. So when he was on my show, he shared that out to his email list. His email list is 1 million people.
Yeah.
That's a game changer.
Oh, 100%.
Right? 1 million people in an email. That's a game changer. Now, most big names I get on aren't the top shows. Like actually the number one show that I've ever had on my show is the number 200 ranked lacrosse player in the world. And the reason he was on my show is because he's in my friend's mastermind. And I heard his story and I said, you need to come on my show. It's still the number one downloaded episode of all time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. That's crazy. So it's one of my top podcasts, like download wise, exact same thing. Doesn't have a big following, just a great story. And more people heard it. It just kept spreading organically. People were like, you got to hear the story, And it was one that it wasn't a big spike. It just kept growing over time. And it took about a 6-month period, but we're at like a huge amount of downloads, but it just constantly every week that one, I could look at all on the list, and that one every week you got, for some reason, is always 15, 20 more downloads on that one, 15 more, and it just keeps growing organically. And it's which is really, really cool to see. Right. Yeah. So I've had that, but I've also had really, like I had, Dr. Bill Dorfman. Have you heard of him?
I haven't.
Dr. Bill Dorfman. He's got like 1.5 million followers on Instagram. He is, the dentist for the stars. He's like Oprah Winfrey's dentist, the Clinton's dentist, but he also was the dentist on the ABC reality show, Extreme Makeover.
Okay.
So he's on Extreme Makeover. He's on the show, The Doctors. Like he's a celebrity, right? And he had a really cool, interesting story. And we went totally where he didn't usually go. So he was all surprised, and he just shared that. And that one got it. He was one of the guys that has a big following that I got a massive reaction with, because he actually took the time to, like, he's like, I love this. And he kept pushing and pushing it. So it all depends on how you said, it all depends on, everybody's so individual with it, right?
Yeah.
We're just going on past an hour here. Is there anything, I'm going to have one more question for you, but is there anything that you want to talk to the audience about, or give anything about podcasting or yourself that we didn't jump into today?
Yeah, actually, here's something that I've been sharing a lot lately that I think is really important that a lot of people don't talk about. People hear, and we didn't get too much into my story, but the reality is I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. Based off of statistics, based off of what the world says is happening, I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing. Here's the biggest secret. That I learned mostly over the last 5 years while interviewing some of the top people in the world, was you have to take care of yourself first, right? So like there's a lot of things we have to do in life, right? Like I have a girlfriend, her kids, my family, my friends, my business, all these things, right? But I have to take care of myself first, because if I'm not taking care of myself, I have nothing left to give. And it seems super selfish to say I'm number one in my life, but because I am selfish in saying I'm number one in my life and I do the things I need to do to fill my cup, I have so much more to give. And so the one thing I want to share with people is don't burn yourself out on other people who aren't willing to do the work for themselves. Make sure you're taking care of yourself first, and the rest is going to take care of itself. I know that sounds totally cliche, but I promise you that if you do the things that are right for you, your heart, your mind, your body, your soul, the rest will take care of itself. And that's super important for people to hear.
I appreciate that. That's something I'm very passionate about as well. Like anybody knows my story, like obviously family's very important to me, but health, spiritually, mentally, physically is always at the top of my, and I preach this pretty much all my podcasts to everybody is how important health, and you got to put health on top of your pinnacle, because there's whatever simple sayings like everybody says, if you're in a hospital bed, that Porsche means absolutely shit in the driveway, right? So taking care of yourself, and then also mentally, like we just had this past week, and I'm dropping a crazy episode this Wednesday with a gentleman talking about mental health. And we just had something called Bell. We have it here once a year. It's called Bella's Talk Day. And it's a big global communication company here in Toronto, Canada. And what they do is they donate 5 cents for everybody that texts, let's talk, and all this. Because mental health. I mean, entrepreneurs, a lot of people don't realize the pressure entrepreneurs go through, because they're put on this level where they're expected to succeed.
Yeah.
And there's so many moments when you feel like you're not good enough, or you feel like you're being used, or you feel like there's so much mental stuff we go through. So being mentally at a high peak and level, and being physically at that level, be able to run with your kids, be able to be active, be able to have the energy. So taking care of yourself, I think is such a good point you brought up, and such an important part, because if we can't take care of yourselves, you're not going to be able to take care of anybody else around you. So I appreciate you saying that. One quick question I always ask, and I never have anything scripted, but I always ask, actually I have two questions I always ask everybody at the end. I'll drive them to you. Few words, how would you want to be described by your closest loved ones if something were to happen to you?
I was a better person after knowing him than I was before.
Yeah, simple, sweet, and superpower. If you can see, I love my Superman. Superpower. If you had one superpower, what would it be?
Oh, that's so hard. I'd want all of them.
Are you a geeked out superhero too?
So I'm not, but I as an adult, I've gotten into the movies as they've grown. But it's so hard. But I would say, it being invisible. I think that'd be a ton of fun. You'd be able to sneak into any room you want. Like, here's the thing. I love
that got creepy really quickly.
That got creepy. Damn, it did get creepy. But here's what I mean. So I love podcasting because I love.
That's going to be our little intro to this podcast. I'm joking.
Justin's really creepy. Listen here, the title of the episode. But like, I love the in-depth conversations that happen on my podcast. But like, imagine the in-depth conversations that happen in like the Oval Office, or like to be invisible and to be able to like sneak in and just pay attention to like all this crazy high level stuff. I'd love it. I know that sounds creepy now that you pointed it out, but to be invisible.
But you know what's funny, that as you said that. It's I've only been on there 3 times. I've only been on there 3 times because I've run my own room for it. But Clubhouse is essentially that. And I think that's why it's taking so much traction. But are you on Clubhouse?
I am on Clubhouse. I've only done it's crazy. I've done like 4 or 5 different rooms that I've been on with other people. I have like 500 followers already. I've gotten a ton of followers on Instagram. Like it's a power tool if you have the time to do it. The issue is I don't have the time to sit on there for 2 hours a day, like all my friends.
Some people are on there for like 5-6 hours.
It's crazy.
Like John Lee, when I had him on, he said he was on there because he's on there. He said 100,000 followers. He's on there between 12 to 15 hours a day. He's on it. He essentially has his phone on all time, and he'll answer questions as he's working. So I've limited myself. So I've done 2 dad rooms, and I've co-hosted it with Brian Ward from Dad Up Podcast. So we've done that, and then we've run Entrepreneurial Morning one on Saturday morning. And one thing, as a moderator, I tell people right off the bat, no pitching. I don't care. We're just having an open conversation, and it's just exploded. Like the last Dad Up one, we had, you know who Brad Lee is?
Yep.
Brad Lee, Sean Whaler. You know who he is? Whalen.
Yeah.
We had him on, Bradley. They all popped in and they all started talking. And since then I've connected. And it's like all of a sudden we had the room full of all these powerhouse dads.
That's awesome.
All having this crazy conversation. Dan Caldwell on there. Oh, yeah. We had it was just a powerhouse. And it was just everybody having this great dad conversation. It was just so much fun. And as it ended, all of a sudden, like I said, I got like 19 messages on IG as soon as it was done. It was crazy. Everybody's like, "Oh, you want to connect? You want to have a coffee?" Like, so it's a great networking tool, but you have to be very precise to what you would want to do because the time will fly on there very, very quickly.
Yeah, it's
very
crazy.
Cool. I appreciate you. I appreciate this. I'm going to make sure this podcast is live. I'll bump some stuff around so it's live on Wednesday. So it's right before your event. So then I'll put the links to your event. Hopefully you get ton more people getting on there. And I appreciate you. I love the connection, and I like your story, and hopefully this will be a friendship we'll continue with, brother. Anything else you want to leave with the audience?
No, I'm excited to get to know some of your audience as they reach out. So feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to connect. And Jeff, honestly, this conversation has been phenomenal. I love the fact that we talked about wrestling. We went into places I've never expected to go. This was phenomenal, man. I'm excited to also have you on my show, by the way. I think I'm interviewing you next week or something like that.
Something
excited to have you on my show as well, man.
So we'll talk a little bit more wrestling next week. I'll come up with some more some names and all that. So I appreciate it, brother. And all the show notes, I'm going to put all the info, like I said, how to get on the live event, how to get a hold of Justin, how to get on his podcast. All that stuff will be on the show notes and on our end notes as well. So appreciate you. Thank you, brother. Have a good day. That's a wrap for today. I want to thank our guest, Justin, for being such an amazing guest. Great conversation. We had a blast on today. Could have talked for another couple hours. If you guys enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, please spread the word. Tell your friends, tell your family. We're trying to build something special here. Leave a review. 5 stars would be absolutely amazing. We always spend our time to read a review, so we appreciate them all. Until next week, guys, keep moving forward.